My name's Jim McVeigh. I'm a professor in substance use and associated behaviours at Manchester Metropolitan University. Just to give you a little bit of my background, I think it's quite important in as much as, you know, our background dictates who we are. It skews our opinions, it directs where we research and influences everything. So it's important that we do declare our interests. I mean, I'm from a public health background, originally a general nurse, and that has influenced my views around harm reduction, around engaging with populations who may be exposing themselves to risks. And that is the approach that I've kept over the years, from working at needle and syringe programs through to drug services and through into academia. So today I'm going to draw on some of the work that I've been conducting over the years. I mean, I started this in when I started working in the needle and syringe program, and we first started seeing increasing numbers of people who were clearly using anabolic steroids, and there wasn't a great deal of evidence to draw on. There wasn't a lot of material to use. What there was this group of people who were happy to discuss what was happening and to develop services, and that is what's given me, I suppose, the opportunity to really engage with this group. And I don't think anything can beat the first-hand experiences of engaging with people and finding out what people are doing, why they're doing it, how they're experiencing things, what they need, and that's this piece of work is developed from that. So I'll make a start. I'll just close some of the things which I've accidentally opened. So this is based, this presentation is looking at the public health implications and whether the use of anabolic steroids is a public health concern. It's based on ongoing research and a chapter that I've recently published with Jeff Bates and Gemma Yarwood in a really good book that April and Jesper have put together. First of all, before we go any further, and this is I'll include a few confessions here rather than sort of repainting what I've done, and I'll highlight some of the things I've done wrong. When I first started doing this, I presumed the use of anabolic steroids was a public health issue, and I didn't even define it. And that's one of the problems that we have, that if you repeat some things enough times, it becomes the recognized wisdom around things. And really, we do need to start defining things and looking at how we actually monitor things over time. So I'm going to give a little bit about what we mean about enhancement drugs. What do we mean by a public health issue? What I've done in a semi-formal way around monitoring public health implications, and then try and justify the conclusions that we'll be making. So, I mean, when we talk about drugs, I mean, we like to categorize things. We like to put things into distinct categories and attach them to different populations, different activities. And we can think of, you know, drugs as being either therapeutic, psychoactive, or we can think of it as being enhancement. I mean, within therapeutic, you can also split them off to prescribed and over-the-counter medications, because in reality, it's a lot messier than that. And it looks like this. And there's plenty of drugs that fall into all those categories. So it's important that if we're talking about anabolic steroids, are we talking about the pharmacological effects of anabolic steroids? Is that a public health issue? Or are the users of anabolic steroids facing public health challenges? And that might be nothing to do with the pharmacology of the public health issues. It may be other forms of drug use which is allied to their anabolic steroid use. So for human enhancement drugs, this is a common definition that we use, that it's to use of a chemical to add value, to make greater, to enhance beauty or effectiveness of an appearance or a behavior or an ability. And quite often we tend to think of enhancement drugs as being, very high tech, and some of them are. And we almost futuristic. And if we can look in popular culture, the red pill, blue pill, we look at Lucy. I'm just picking all my favorite films now, but Lucy, Limitless, stuff like these are all sorts of modern films which sort of play on this issue, and some of them do very well. But if we go back into fiction, Lewis Carroll. The Drink Me Potion to Get Bigger, Aldous Huxley, Soma. These are enhancement drugs as well. It's not a new phenomenon. We go back in history into the arts. There's this photograph of the Fountain of Youth, where the old, the injured, the infirm entering this pool on one side and emerging on the other side, young, refreshed, beautiful. It also says quite a bit about gender issues, that it only seems to be the women, the men just appear to be on the other side looking very rich, which probably reflects society. So we see this as an established sort of drive to fulfill and to surpass our potential. In religions, we go way back, obviously the biblical stories, the tree of knowledge and the cognitive enhancing apple. You've got the Epic of Gilgamesh, probably the first examples of writing, which is the adventures of the hero looking for the elixir of life. You've got the moon gazing hare that lives up on the moon, according to Chinese tradition, mixing up the elixir of life. So the reason I say this is that, quite often, and in some educational literature, we're almost led to believe that this drive for muscularity is somehow deviant. And while I'm not disputing that some people may have psychological issues, what I would say is that shouldn't be our default position. Many people are taking these drugs for rational purposes. They're getting what they want from these drugs. Quite often they're getting other things as well. But it wouldn't be an issue and a concern if these drugs didn't provide people with some of the things that they want. So it's important that we bear those things in mind when we're talking about enhancement drugs in general and anabolic steroids in particular. So we've got these categories of enhancement drugs. Obviously, we've got anabolic-androgenic steroids there at the top. These are by far the most researched of the different drugs, the highest profile. They've been around for 100+ years. And they fit in with these other, what we class as image and performance enhancing drugs. So, alongside your anabolic products to increase musculature and strength, you have a number of products to reduce fat content for cutting. Obviously, from a bodybuilding or an aesthetic point of view, it's the double whammy of increased musculature and reduced fat. Also, quite heavily associated with bodybuilding before it diffused to the wider population was things like melanotan, which is a tanning agent. Now, those other ones that I've circled below, I'm not saying that anabolic steroid users don't use these drugs. Certainly, we've got very strong evidence that anabolic steroid users will use a whole range of different drugs, but these wouldn't be classed as the image and performance enhancing drugs or performance and image enhancing drugs. It's that top section that we really think of as being particularly tied to this population. So anabolic androgenic steroids, just very briefly, what are they? And while by no means a pharmacologist, I'll in very broad terms just remind us what they actually do. So they're synthetic derivatives of the primary male sex hormone testosterone. When we say primary male, it's also produced by women, but in much smaller amounts. And the history of all this starts with this fella, Arnold Adolf Berthold. And it was his work, and he really did make a huge contribution to science. And it was his work involving Happy and Sad Mr. Chicken. Unfortunately, he never called his paper Happy and Sad Mr. Chicken, which I think would have actually made it far more popular. But what he did in the mid-1800s was experimenting with cockerels. the removal of testes to see what happened to them, called caponization, and you see they lose the comb, they lose their strut, they lose their shouting, they lose their aggression, all those things that we commonly associate with testosterone. You replant them, it comes back. You replant another cockerel's testes into a cockerel, you can get the same, provided you do the procedure correctly. You'll see it return to normal development and return to its happy functioning chicken behavior. So that was a very important piece of work, because it actually proved the importance of testosterone and the testes. So we talk about anabolic steroids, and now I'm bullying myself into referring to them as anabolic-androgenic steroids, because I think it's important that, by definition, they're not just anabolic steroids, they're anabolic-androgenic steroids, and you can't separate out the two components completely. For the anabolic, the increase in muscle mass and bone density, but the androgenic, those secondary male characteristics, are also a key component, and we need to remember that in many ways, anabolic androgenic steroids have a shotgun effect. They interact with many different organs and systems within the body. It's a little illustration here, which I pinched, which I thought was quite interesting. Obviously, the muscle is key, and key for this population of people who are using anabolic androgenic steroids. I had to pull this one out because it's quite interesting. It says sex hormones responsible for sperm production and penis growth. I felt that I needed to add in the word in puberty. Once you've been through puberty, all the testosterone anabolic androgenic steroids in the world will not make your penis bigger. It was interesting. I was interviewed by a journalist a couple of days ago, and they asked a lot of good questions. I asked about the testes shrinking, and he said, and will it affect the size of your penis? I said no, and forgot that was being filmed, and said, no, it won't make your penis any bigger, but it will shrink your testes so much, your willy may look bigger in comparison. And hopefully that gets cut out before it gets broadcast. But that's the truth of it. It won't actually change your penis size, once you've had that development. It is used in clinical practice, not as much as it used to be. Some severe types of anemia. It has been used in HIV and AIDS, used in postmenopausal women. Now we're seeing increasingly HRT for men. And we're seeing those people who either have, through their aging process, have a reduction in testosterone production, or through maybe trauma or through cancer and have had testes removed. And that has become quite a growth area, first of all in the States, but it's increasingly over here in the UK. It has been used as a male contraceptive. It was abandoned by the WHO, and reading between the lines, it seems to be because they don't trust men to be responsible enough to take it on a regular basis when the investment in the outcome isn't as high on women in control of their contraception. And I think that was probably the unwritten reason why it hasn't been pursued further. Again, a reason that we shouldn't just say steroids is to avoid this confusion with corticosteroids. There have been publications in the past where clearly in surveys it hasn't specified between anabolic and corticosteroids, and has come up with some spurious results around prevalence. So what defines a public health issue? It's really, there's two axes for it, and this was something that I started to look at in the 1990s, and my sort of simplistic way, because there wasn't like the Ladybird Book of Public Health, which maybe I should have been setting my sights a bit higher than that, but I just wanted very basic, what is a public health issue? The best things that I could come up with were, there has to be sufficient numbers involved for it to be a public health concern, and the negative effects have to be severe enough for it to be a public health concern. But then we can start unpicking it and look for different indicators in there. And these are the ones that I came up with in the 90s, and splitting them into 4 different categories of epidemiology, motives and methods, effects and responses. So in the epidemiology, how many people use it? Who are those people? The who are is really important from a public health point of view. Are they a vulnerable group? Are there other factors we should consider? Are there other potential issues which may compromise their health, which may make it difficult to us to engage with? Do we know the reasons people are using and how they're using? What are the adverse effects? But equally, what are the positive effects? We need to be able to understand the 2 things together. And the respective responses, in particular across treatment, prevention and harm reduction. So that is what I started monitoring in 1999. So I'd been working in the field for a decade at this point. And I thought, what I'll do is, I'll start, and I was going to do it yearly, but it didn't work out that way. And I've just done a snapshot every 10 years. But I thought, I'll just do it my own ready reckoning of how I see the evidence base developing across those different criteria. And you know, when we talk about developing an evidence base, maybe it's just me who was naive, but my belief was that as time goes on, we'll get a better understanding of a subject, and there'll be a linear line showing how we better comprehend the issues and how we can support people and deliver effective research and effective interventions. It doesn't quite work that way though. And it works because of, in particular on this one, we use this as an example, motivations and methods. In 1999, epidemiology was weak. What we knew about the characteristics of users, I'd say it was moderate. And it was moderate because we did a lot of work, in particular, I'm thinking in USA, UK and Australia, and a number of European countries as well. But mostly looking at those people attending hardcore gyms, those people who we would think of as either bodybuilders or aspiring bodybuilders, those people within perhaps the security industry or using for occupational purposes, those people who wanted to be big, wanted to be strong. And you know, we have a reasonable understanding of that. However, over time, the more we looked, the more we realized there were hidden populations out there. We kind of, well, we've always known that there are women there using anabolic steroids. They were very much under-researched. Other populations that were under-researched, people within the prison environment, people who were using within specific occupations that were difficult to engage with. So in the turn of the millennium, we started to get a better understanding. So you can see our understanding going from moderate to strong, but then to moderate again, as we realized that there were more populations out there. We know that there's higher levels of use within, say, the gay community. We know that there's people using as part of a much wider array of drugs. And so we need to be able to find those harder to reach populations. For things like the reasons for use is tied very closely with those characteristics. Then we had we thought we understood everything about methods of use. You know, most people will inject and use orally, they'll cycle. You know, reading the underground literature and conducting interviews with users, we had a good understanding. But of course, the interviews we conducted were with those people who were mostly training in hardcore gyms, who were all reading the same underground steroid handbooks. We weren't finding those hidden populations. We weren't finding people who were just using orals. We weren't finding young people. We know that you know, people may well use for a period of time before they would either come in contact to a needle and syringe program or use them for a while before engaging within the gym community evening. But we wouldn't know what they were doing then. We wouldn't have that first-hand information. So again, our understanding has deteriorated around that. So that's the reason why we've seen this up and down around an assessment of the evidence. And we really do need to move across all these different parameters to get a clearer understanding of what's happening. So we move on to epidemiology, and I'm sure many of you are aware of Dominic Sago's work from it's nearly 10 years ago now. He conducted a meta-analysis of available international data and came up with this estimate. And it was a really comprehensive piece of work. The thing that let it down, which is completely out of Dominic and his colleagues' hands, was the fact that a lot of the research and the prevalence studies were not robust enough. There wasn't enough standardization across those different studies. So that was a shortcoming within it. But it did give us a snapshot of perhaps the extent overall. Also the work by Harrison Pope and Jen Kaneyama, who estimated that up to 4 million Americans may have used anabolic steroids. So well, we can't hang absolute confidence on these figures. It gives an impression of the size of the issue, especially when you compare it to, say, the figures that were coming out of the UK. This is from the Crime Survey for England and Wales. Now, the Crime Survey for England and Wales has been going since the mid-90s, and it's a household survey. And it's sponsored by the Home Office, and people go around, knock on people's doors and say, what's your experiences of crime? What's your experience of drug use? What have you used in the last 4 weeks, last year, used ever? And there's some alarm bells. A quarter of people don't get access, so they refuse access to collect data there. If I was using drugs and the Home Office called around and knocked on my house, I'd be a bit reluctant to give them access, I think, probably. But other issues with it, this top one, the blue line. So this is saying what proportion of adults had used anabolic steroids ever. And you see it dropping from over 1% to less than 0.5% in the space of 2 years. Now, if you see this shape of a huge ski slope like that on longitude lifetime prevalence, it can only mean two things. One, we've killed tens of thousands of steroid users in 1 year, or something's gone wrong with the data. There's something went wrong with the data, I'm pleased to say. They changed the question. And from a public health point of view, if you want to reduce the prevalence of something, make the question more complicated. People get bored and just say no. If you put in 2 sets of brackets next to each other and a real queer clause in there, and people just say no because they lose track of what the question. Have you ever taken an anabolic steroids not prescribed by a doctor, even if it was a long time ago? None of the other questions start saying things like, even if it was a long time ago. So it messed things up completely. And that's what tumbled that piece down there. After that, you can see that blue line. We've got a bit of a sort of steady incline over time. It's not feasible that this is the right sort of prevalence, but the actual shape and trend maybe. On this grey line, this is young people used in the last year. And whenever you see that sort of level of volatility, so that this zigzag, it means your sample size is too small. So, and that could mean the difference between 4 or 5 people saying yes 1 year and another 4 or 5 people saying no another year. So it hasn't got the strength really to develop that trend. If we look at the actual numbers and get interesting again, where you compare, say, 2018 to 19 adult lifetime use. Yep, we've definitely killed 100,000 steroid users in a year. Again, I think I think accident and emergency departments might have picked up on that one if that was happening. Also, this figure for 2019-20, 31,000 anabolic steroid users. We know there were over 12,500 steroid users attending needle exchanges just in Wales in that year. So, you know, it's just not feasible. And that has got us, myself, colleagues, people like Viv Hope, thinking about what we should do. So we got together as a group of people, Ian Boardley, a number of other colleagues, to start trying to get a better understanding over the figures. This is an interesting one, and this is, I'm not going to name him for two reasons. One, I think he's actually online watching, and two, he's a power lifter and will snap me in half like a twig. So I won't name him, but, and his answer was correct. Journalist. So would you say that there are 1 million steroid users? Yes, there could be. Fair enough. Of course, by the time the news conferences had been done, my one, which was, well, we can't say exact figures, there's significant numbers, and it's of course boring. No one took my one, but his one went all around the world. We've got 1 million steroid users, to the point where UK anti-doping quote this, an MP in Parliament quoted these figures, but no one actually said, well, how did they know? You know, so this isn't me having a go at, I don't say his name, but you know, people are that hungry for a headline, they will create headlines from stuff. What we wanted to do is to try and get some evidence to provide an indication. So what we have got, we've got needle and syringe program data from some areas. We've got all of Wales, we've got swathes of Scotland, most of Scotland, and we've got a few areas of England. So we've got some sort of sentinel populations where we could say, you know, we've got this level of anabolic steroid users presenting at these services. And we've got our IPEDs info survey, which we've been sponsored by Public Health Wales over a number of years. So we had intelligence from that. We used Crime Stoppers, and we used Crime Stoppers, not that it will give us prevalence data, but they had intelligence on markets. And what we wanted was to find out what the geographical spread is. So if we've got, you know, a few anchor points in England, anchor points in Scotland and Wales, can we identify if these anchor points have similarities to other places, so that we can pull that together and say, well, actually, we can use this right the way across the patch. Is southwest of England the same as the northeast of England? If not, what factor do we need to put in? So that's what we've been working on. Also, Exchange Supplies provided us with intelligence on the geographical spread, because you know a lot of anabolic steroids users will buy their injecting equipment directly from the suppliers. So again, we could see this picture, and we were able to start looking at what the possibilities of these numbers may be. We wanted to know, alongside this, or to feed into this, what percentage of men inject their steroids, because there's also a population of what people using just oral. And the percentage of men using injecting who attend needle and syringe programs, and what the issue is around women, whether there's different variations, and whether the geographical variations. We know in the past there appeared to be really pronounced geographical variations tied in with probably the industrial heartlands of the UK and levels of deprivation. We wanted to revisit that. And what we did to develop our estimates was Viv doing a shed load of big sums, and then employing a Delphi survey. So you bring in a group of experts and you get a consensus. You get a consensus by looking at these specific pieces of information that we needed to build a picture, bring it together, get a comprehensive overview, send it back out to the survey participants, get feedback in again to refine those calculations and then come up with 2 or 3 suggestions of what was the most likely scenario for the number of people using anabolic steroids in the previous year. And from that, we were able to come up with round about 500,000. So a range of 328 to 687, with 447,000 sitting in the middle of that, is the most plausible one. Now, so it's less than the 1 million, but it's a hell of a lot more than the calculations that the Crime Survey for England and Wales were coming out with. So we were able to feed in basically, the figures that we came up with there are 10 times the estimate that were being used by the Home Office, which informs government policy. So we were able to say this is a larger population. We need to do more work to refine it and to look at the subpopulations. And that's when it comes to targeted interventions, we need to know more about those individual people. You may be familiar with this work. This was work that Asfes Christensen led, and he based this on the qualitative work that he'd been conducting with colleagues in Denmark. And it was to provide a typology, pen portraits of different types of users, with the idea to be able to see who is conducting their steroid use with enhanced risk taking, what their rationales are, what their drivers are, what their other associated behaviors were, and how that should inform things. And we were involved as well. I found this really interesting, but what we did, we took a different approach, and we used our IPED survey to do a cluster analysis. So while ASK's team looked at qualitative data and came up with those 4 groups, we did a cluster analysis on the data, and that forces people into a number of groups of common features. And it's interesting, it forced them into 4 groups, the same as ASK's work, and it was pretty similar. Now, I'm not saying that if we run it again on a following year's data, it might create 5 groups, it might create 3 groups. You know, it's not written in stone, this, but it shows that there are commonalities of approaches, behavior, risk-taking, and we should bear those in mind. But I think what this really does more than anything else is it's an engagement tool. If you've got a poster like that up with the different types, just asking the client, would you say you fit into any of them? If not, why not? What's wrong with it? Why would you do different? Those sort of things to be able to discuss the issues, you know, really helpful. And, you know, we put things out there to be criticized by the population and our target population of people who are using or considering the use. And that's the real value. I just ran a quick search. This was just before Christmas. At subgroups, and you know, it's interesting that all these are I may have missed ones, but just in the last year, all these different groups have been identified as being targets for issues around anabolic-androgenic steroids. There's a couple of interesting bits to pull up there. You've got younger men and older men. Again, I had a different journalist contacted a couple of weeks ago and said, oh, we're doing this expose on this issue of young men using anabolic steroids. I said, you know, it's not just young men. Well, on blah, 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 blah. But, oh, that's fascinating. So can you get us some young men to interview? You're not listening. From a media point of view, it's the young men that are fantastically interesting. And by and large, they're not as interested in the wider population. And it's interesting, when all this started in the 80s, the only prevalent studies or really any sort of sociological work was amongst USA high school males. So we have moved on quite a bit from that, but I don't think the media has. So we've got this within the media, want us to think about the children, which, you know, I can understand to a degree, but the data doesn't entirely bear this out. When we looked at needle and syringe data in Cheshire and Merseyside, comparing mean age in 1995 to 2015. Now, when you ask people working in these environments, they will often say, yeah, we've got increasing numbers of young people coming, but the data doesn't always back that up. It does seem to be an older population that we're seeing in needle and syringe programs. From the IPED survey, mean age of first injection of mean age of first oral was in their mid-20s, but out of that total population in the IPED survey, we have nearly as many over the age of 40 as under the age of 25. And I think this reflects, one, an aging population. Some of these lads have been used, well, you shouldn't call them lads, mature men. Some of these mature men have been using for, 30 years. Some people have taken it up recently, but later on in life. So, there's different things going on. It's not just one size fits all. And Evelyn Hearn is nearing completion of a PhD, which she's just published this scoping review, looking in particular at older men. I think this will be an increasing issue for primary healthcare, for endocrinologists, as people become more aware of perhaps the frailties of their testosterone production and wanting to return to levels that they may have experienced in their youth. So women on anabolic steroids, this would take a lecture on its own. It's very much an understudied area. We're starting to get more research out. I found it the most enlightening research that I ever did when I did this in the mid-90s, because I got absolutely put in my place by them, and I realized that I was judgmental, even though I didn't consider I was when I had my questionnaire with them. And well, I only made the mistake the first time because the first person I interviewed ripped me to bits, really, and because I was asking about side effects. And she liked to point out that clitoral enlargement enhanced her sexual satisfaction. Why am I calling it a side effect? Increased body hair. She's a competitive bodybuilder. Why shouldn't she shave just like men? Breasts, she doesn't need them. Around periods and menstrual cycle, which is where she really took me to task and said, do you think women enjoy their menstrual cycle? To them, they weren't side effects. This comes with the territory. I am a competitive bodybuilder. This is what I do. Stop judging me. And it really did. It really was a valuable lesson to me that, we're there by invitation to engage with these people, and we have to learn from them. We shouldn't be taking in our preconceived ideas over what is negative or positive. This is a piece of work from, it's a web-based one from researchers in the States. And it's just interesting that 90% of both sexes intended to continue use. So while we talk about the life-changing effects of anabolic androgenic steroids and women, still for many women, it comes with the territory, and they're willing to make that sacrifice, or what they consider to be what goes with the territory. So motivations and methods of use. This is Big Dave. He's quite happy with me using his picture, and this is commonly what what I think of when we talk about anabolic androgenic steroid use. Of course, in reality, they're more likely to look like this, and looking to put on, a few pounds of decent muscle. Most people using anabolic steroids won't have a 20 or 30 year career of using these drugs. They won't be looking to get the biggest arms in the country. They won't be looking to get absolutely massive. And they'll probably move on or get bored with it after a couple of cycles. And hopefully they will move on and have no longer term problems. So it's important to remember that the most spectacular pictures aren't necessarily the most accurate reflection. One of the things that we did badly early on, or I did badly early on, was around motivations. And I just took it on face value. People take anabolic steroids because they want to get bigger and they want to be stronger, and sort of left it there and didn't think about the multiple reasons why people use. Yeah, people may have a reason why they start to use. It might not be the same reason by the time that they continue using, or they may have adopted additional reasons as well. The other thing that, for years, my mantra was that this is a public health issue. It's not a sporting issue. It's both. Here we see that the third one down, sporting athletic performance, sort of this is discounting bodybuilding, so sports athletic performance other than bodybuilding. For 27%, this was really important. For 33%, it was not important at all. So while for people engaged in sport, their primary reason may be for body image reasons, but in a lot of those sports that they're also engaged in, size and strength, it's certainly not at a disadvantage. So you start to see those things adding up. Also starting to see, which we didn't have in the past, was people saying it's about their own hormone replacement therapy, or the other way that people were phrasing it, it's about retaining or regaining youthful appearance. So more and more, and I think perhaps social media, perhaps society in general, as a species, we expect and we want more and more. For men, they may want a particular appearance. They want to engage in sport in their social and spare time. They may want to go out partying. They may want to get a good degree and then bring in cognitive enhancers. So it's a big, complicated life, and people want as much of it as they can. And the power of advertising and information will influence these choices. Also, increased sex drive in there. You don't get many people would say that they're not only primary, but that their sole reason is for increased sex drive. You probably will get some people, but not many. But it's certainly, for many, it's not seen as, here we've got 8.4% as being extremely important, potentially beneficial to them. This is a quote from a quote for Andreas. He was the researcher, he didn't actually say it. It's like you could run through a wall and shag anything on the other side, was his contribution to does anabolic steroids increase your sex drive. We've also got this piece from Orlando Harvey and some other pieces coming out around, in particular around trenbolone and some of the sexual effects that it has. But I do wonder, is it about increased sex drive, or is this about domination? And I think that's something that we do need more considered research around. So steroids, methods, regimes, decision making, these are things that I'm sure you're all aware of. We had when we started looking at this, it was all about stacks, 6 weeks on, 6 weeks off, then going up to 12 weeks. It was pyramiding, which isn't so popular now. Post-cycle therapy had come in. But what's happened over the last 10, 15 years is this blast and cruise. And by that, we mean people taking their large dosages as they're on cycle, and then they're off cycle, they're still taking a maintenance dose. And sometimes that's quite a hefty maintenance dose. So we've seen these changes over time. Literally shed loads of different drugs out there. They're based on, three sort of variations of either testosterone, DHT, or nandrolone, each of them with different ratio between what will aromatize, what will cause the feminization or aromatization, how quickly the drugs will be in and out of the system. And this all contributes to the art of steroid use as much as the science of steroid use. And as academics, we have little to contribute around this because we haven't, obviously we're not able to do the real world evaluations and research to be able to identify what are most likely to cause the adverse effects, what is most likely to cause relatively risk-free gains. We don't have them. Anecdotally, users will be there. Obviously, that's weakness because it's a sample of one, but in the absence of anything else, people will latch onto that information, and we have little that we can contribute. Obviously, with the underground labs, we have a big increase in the different blends where you basically put any of the different anabolic steroids together. This just giving an idea of the sort of typical dosages that are being used. bearing in mind that men produce what, about 40 or 50 milligrams of testosterone, you can see how you can very quickly get up to several grams, several thousands of milligrams in a given week, without really knowing what that may cause in the long term. The reason, say, we don't know what will cause in the long term, the main wild card around this is they're illicitly manufactured. It is tales of the unexpected. These are products that we've had tested. All the top ones came back with nothing at all. The bottom ones came back with the different drugs than they were supposed to be. Although they did get damn close with the sustanon. Only one mistake, so they would have passed that, but still the wrong drug. You may think, supplements are safer. Well, not really. We tested all these supplements, and they came back with classical anabolic steroids and some reasonable dosages as well. And it makes sense. If you're an unscrupulous entrepreneur, you could either get investment of millions of pounds to develop a new testosterone booster, which probably won't work, or you could just get some packaging made and put classical anabolic steroids in them, sell them as testosterone boosters and say they're as good as the real thing. Well, it's because they are the real thing. But it is a concern that people don't know that they're actually using. So polypharmacy, the extent of my pharmacotherapy knowledge, it's complicated. If it was just the anabolic steroids, it would possibly be able to get our heads around it a little bit differently, but there's a wealth of different drugs which are taken to either as post-cycle therapies or to combat specific adverse effects. There's other anabolic agents, and there's a whole range of weight loss drugs. Remember the holy grail, increase your muscle, cut your fat. So working at it from both sides it is very common. I'll mention these three very quickly. Growth hormones, fascinating. When we did this work in the 90s with Percocorchia, only 2.7% of the sample had used growth hormone in the past 6 months. Now we're looking more like a third, sometimes more, have used growth hormone. The reason being, in the early 90s, it was so expensive. It cost maybe what, £10 an international unit. Now you can get stuff imported from China around about £1 an international unit. And we've had it tested, it comes back. Yeah, there's some adulteration in there, but yeah, it's growth hormone. And so it makes it available to anyone who can afford anabolic steroids, can probably afford growth hormone as well. So we've seen this huge increase there. We don't really know what those long-term effects are, apart from the fact that it increases it increases the size of tissue within the body. Obviously muscles, as do anabolic steroids, but a whole range of other tissues as well. So it is a concern. We've got melanotam, which is taken off as an injectable and now being sold as an inhaler. We had this tested, and again we see some stuff that looks exactly the same can be twice the strength as the other, and up to 6% crap, basically, impurities. I took this advert in because it's my favorite one. This was when Melanotam Magic kicked off, and they were looking to increase their client base, make your mother even more beautiful this Mother's Day by giving her £44 worth of contaminated injectable. So they're looking to expand this market, and it's the power of this social media that the packaging, the man with the white coat on in the background, they all look very good, sort of Amazon or Boots or something like that, whereas really people quite often buy an absolute crap. DMP, the most potent weight loss drug ever, been around since the 30s. Sounds too good to be true. Yeah, it is true. It does literally burn fat away. No dieting, don't have to do anything other than take this and hope it doesn't kill you. It's one of the most dangerous products that I've ever come across. It's not even classed as a drug, it's classed as a metabolic poison. Been a number of deaths from this because it just overheats your body. There's no ceiling on the extent of it. It was identified by Dan Duchesne and promoted by him. And we've seen it take the life of a number of bodybuilders. But what we've also seen is this diffusion into the wider population. Quite often people who may have eating disorders, certainly not overweight by any means, and the only information that they will probably be coming across is that information related to bodybuilders who are a hell of a lot bigger with them, and if they try to adopt those dosages, you know, it really is a recipe for tragedy. For me, it's one of the big concerns is the diffusion when behavior associated with drug use moves from one population to another. It really does create a new public health concern. Rogers did this work around how ideas diffuse, and this is a classic one where it's the innovators, the early adopters are those people at the cutting edge of bodybuilding who are running the bulletin boards and a number of the websites. And by the time it gets to those people, the late majority or the laggards, you know, they're completely removed from any of the culture that has grown up around this and are getting half a story. So it really is a concern, a bit of shameful self-publicity. There's a TED talk I did about this. For me, the main concern about when we move drug behaviors from one population to another and how that can create problems. So you're more than welcome to check that one out. Not just around enhancement drugs, you know, the idea of my body as a temple, in some ways, for some people, it's my body as a test tube. One study we had, nearly half had used cocaine in the previous year, Viagra commonly being used, painkillers, either prescription or prescribed, being used, and these can all contribute to the complexity of the drug use. So why do some people develop problems? Why do some people not? This work that was led by Jeff Bates, and it was a systems approach. And what we wanted to do was to try to unpick what are the influencing factors. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this because I know it's quite small for you to be able to see, but the link's there. And I'd suggest you go in there and have a look at that. And you have a look how these different things around identity, around interaction with services and health professionals, the market itself, the thought processes, beliefs around health and well-being, the environment, how these all come together and influence each other. And if we're going to be effective in developing evaluations to help support people and reduce harms, we need to look at this level of complexity. One, to make sure things are effective, but two, that we don't introduce unintended consequences, like, say, the Home Office did when they brought in a last-minute change to the report published in 2010, where they decided they should make the sale of anabolic steroids through any means other than personal possession illegal. So you can't buy them from a website, you can't buy them from abroad. And what that meant was those large numbers of people were buying them from, say, pharmacies on the continent and no longer able to do that. So what we're seeing now is a lot more home-brewed stuff that have been produced from base chemicals made without good quality assurance in China, coming to the UK, being put together. For me, that's a health concern, it's a public health concern, and it is a direct result from the ACMD trying to do something that they thought would put people off using, whereas really it's just sent them down a different track into potentially more dangerous behaviours. So effects, efficacy of steroids, as we know, they work, and there's payback. When you take anabolic steroids, you no longer produce your own, and that's where many of those adverse effects come. We have adverse effects from having too much testosterone, then we have the adverse effects from not having enough testosterone. And it may surprise you, but we've only known categorically since 1996 that anabolic steroids work. In reality, you know, I think people got suspicious a bit before 1996 that anabolic steroids worked. And this is one of the reasons of this lack of trust between those people involved in the culture and perhaps the scientific and the medical community, because there were still people saying right into the 1990s, oh, they don't work anyway, it's just nonsense. Well, it was very clear that they were working. But one of the complications around that, it is an example of, and this is Brown Séquard. He did work at the end of the 1800s. And I just love this quote. He was the equivalent of the television doctor, you know, the one that you get on Good Morning Britain. He was the equivalent of that of the day. He was a big celebrity doctor, and he started experimenting, injecting extracts of testes into himself. And he could suddenly run up and down the stairs, do all kind of things. Of course, every time it's being replicated, it doesn't work. It's nonsense. It's placebo. It had no scientific way of actually working what he'd done. But it shows that there is a placebo component in there. Now, I'm not saying anabolic steroids don't work, but I'm just saying it's difficult to tease out those two factors. So I've got quite good data now of the range of different adverse effects associated with anabolic steroids. And I worded that quite carefully. We're not entirely secure on the probability of harms, on the risk involved, but we know that there is associated risks here. We can split them into the different categories, and Pope and colleagues, I wouldn't look beyond this June 2014 review. It sums it up really well. Apart from, it was only after this point that the work from Norway has really started taking off, and that work that they've done involving looking at effects on the brain. And this is relatively new work, and they've produced some excellent work there, which I'll touch on again in a minute. So there's three long-term physiological impacts: heart, testes, and head. When I say testes, I mean hypogonadism. You know, will you return to normal testosterone production afterwards? Well, obviously we know that orals affect the liver as well, but I still think these are the three areas that we should be concerned about. We know we've got good work from Pope and colleagues from the States around the mechanisms for the effect on the heart. There's great work coming out from colleagues Imperial at the moment, and their work around endocrinology and the effects of hypergonadism, and that is something which I think will really develop in the coming years. It's quite interesting as well that these non-specific and specific symptoms associated with hypergonadism are very similar to symptoms of dependence, and it makes it quite difficult to be able to tease out which is which. Now, this is a piece from Asserted and colleagues from Norway, where you can clearly see changes in the brain form and function over time caused by anabolic steroids, larger doses over prolonged periods of time. We also know that dependence occurs, and that as with other drugs, it's not just you're dependent or you're not. There's different levels of dependence, and that seems to be linked in very much with executive function and with personality features. And this is a great piece of work that continue to work on there in Norway. There's indirect harms. I've mentioned polypharmacy, blood-borne viruses, mentioned about women, I touched on adulterated products. We know that HIV is there and present amongst some anabolic steroid users. We don't know how they contracted HIV. Some of them, it may be through sexual contact. Some it may be through injecting practices in the past when they were using psychoactive drugs. It may be that they'd shared injecting equipment with other steroid users. We don't know. Most of the data indicates that sharing is very, very low in this population. But the fact that the HIV is there in the population means that we must continue with these messages. We can't be complacent with it, and we must capitalize on the good influence of those people who ensure that safety protocols are adhered to by new users who are coming on the scene. We also know injection site infections happen either through adulterated injectables or through bad practice. We know it's a highly sexually active group. So again, this might link in with the transmission of bloodborne viruses. We also know that significant numbers don't use condoms. For some of you watching, it's going to be a very different situation to here in the UK. In the UK, we do not have a crime for the personal possession or use of anabolic steroids. It's only for supply offences, so supply, possession with intent, manufacturing, distribution. So we have a different situation. It's interesting when you talk to people about the market. I think this sums it up quite well. It depends where you look. It goes all the way from, you know, one man, a bag of powder and some oil and then mixing it up in a bathtub, to some really sophisticated high-tech manufacturing, like this fella who was credited with 60-odd millions worth of business, some of the most high-profile products, until he got nicked. So that whole gang were taken down, and that really was a really big productive company. And we've seen this sort of change in practice and people going more independent. A couple of pictures, a little bit scary on some of the processes involved in these homemade laboratories. I use this as an example. This is one from Denmark. This would be mate Andreas, who was contacted, him and colleagues at the Danish Medicine Agency, around this product. It's a GHRP6, which promotes growth hormone release. They contacted him because the user had bought this, took some, just made him feel a bit nauseous, didn't really seem to do anything. So, like all good drug users, didn't really do much, so he doubled the dose. And he went brown, and it turned out to be melanotan. So when you think how wrong the manufacturers have got this, they put in melanotan instead of GHRP6, a completely different hormone, which shows the dangers that people are being exposed to. The other thing is, this was brilliant. This was someone who contacted us, somebody who was a very knowledgeable user of anabolic steroids, spotted this product on the shelf of a health food shop. And you know, people might say I'm a bit of a sado, but this lad recognized the bracket Z1 epidemiology, that the chemical name basically. He recognized it as being tamoxifen. This was being sold in a health food shop. Tamoxifen or Nolvadex is an anti-cancer medication given to postmenopausal women with breast cancer. Obviously, anabolic steroid users use it to reduce gynecomastia, and it was being sold in a health food shop. So we talk about hidden in plain sight. Last couple of slides. What do we know about the response? It's not good news. In relation to prevention, we don't have good data. No evidence was identified to reduce the use of imaging performance enhancing drugs. This was the summary from NICE guidance in 2017. We have some evidence of interventions which may change attitude and change knowledge, but that's still quite a long way to actually changing behavior. So we're still just at the very beginnings of this. For treatment and harm reduction, I mean, the UK were fortunate that NICE have really endorsed the use of needle and syringe programs for users of these substances, and have highlighted the need that special provision has to be made to make sure that it's as effective as possible. Public Health England, before it's changed its name, worked with us to develop guidance for those commissioning services. And the Orange Book, the Drug Misuse and Dependence, worked with us. This is produced by Departments of Health and the devolved administrations, and they now have whole sections for clinicians who come across people using anabolic steroids. You know, there's not a huge evidence base to go on, but it's there, what is there, and they talk about how to engage with people and the importance of effective communication. So it's the starting point, but now we need to develop the evidence to inform it thoroughly. So treatment, scarce evidence out there. Prevention, we don't really have powerful data around outcome measures and follow-ups. And harm reduction, we're able to look at what can be generalizable from other users, but we still don't have that good a data on the specific population. So we really still are at the very early stages of developing this. One final population, which I think we need to start looking at more closely, are those people within the secure environment, those people in prison. Really good work from Norway has shown the extent in that particular country, but we have got stuff from the UK around seizures, and it is year on year becoming a much bigger issue for the prison system, and not just oral, but injectables as well. In relation to criminal activity, again, this is something which we often see linked within the media, and we really do have to be careful not using the words correlation and causation independently. For this study, we could see a small increase in self-reported aggression within experimental studies. What the implications of that may be, it's difficult to say. But of course, the media just love jumping on it, and any opportunity they will try to link the worst crimes that come to light with anabolic steroid use. Breivik was done, Raoul Moat, they tried to link that. You know, regardless of all the other things that are going on in these people's lives, they picked up on the steroid bit. The London Bridge terror attacks. We had a headline, terrorists on anabolic steroids. Of course, good enough, the toxicologist said they weren't juiced up and it would unlikely to have had any effect on them whatsoever. But of course, that turns up on about page 16. The front page several days beforehand was the one that caught people's attention. The latest one I came across was Putin. And this changed in the space of a day, from people going on about him having used loads of corticosteroids, to him being bloated, to Lord Owen decided to interpret corticosteroids as anabolic steroids and started saying how dangerous it was, and that's probably why he's so aggressive. Absolute nonsense, but it makes a story. So while these drugs have been around 100 years, it's only the last 30 years that we've really had high levels of sort of self-directed use. And we've still got so much to learn as academics and conducting robust research, but also especially through engaging with the communities themselves. There's a resource here if anyone wants to use it on anabolic-steroids.org.uk. Unfortunately, I've been off work for a while, so I've got to update quite a lot on this, but this will be getting back up and running a full pelt in the next couple of months. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim. That was an excellent presentation. I'll give the floor to Chad. Chad, you can moderate the discussion.
Okay, thank you, Lambros. As your voice is not really good, as everybody could hear, I'll thank Jim for this excellent presentation. Very nice, Jim. Yeah. I enjoyed it a lot. Before we switch off the recording and people from the audience can ask questions, I would like to ask 2 questions. First question is, where should IPED research focus on in the next 5 years?
Right. For me, there's 2 areas. One, which we need to conduct effective evaluations, in particular around harm reduction. Now, we've got different harm reduction initiatives which are effectively engaging with people who are using, and in some cases, people who are contemplating the use. What we need to be able to do is to develop the evidence base to see what elements are effective and how we can develop them. So, I mean, we've got some services which are like outreach, where people will go into gyms. We need to be able to provide the evidence that this is actually influencing people's behavior, that it's reducing risks. We've got people coming into needle and syringe programs. Yep, they're getting clean injecting equipment, but what else are they receiving there? And does that change their behavior? Does it make them act as a peer educator? How should we be doing that? All these are going to take, you know, they're not going to happen quickly. We need to get robust data on this to see how effective they may be. We've got increasingly clinics or needle exchanges with a clinical area where they will conduct blood tests. They will monitor people's progress in relation to indicators around their hormone levels, around risk factors. But what we don't always have is good data on what people do with that information. So if I fed back to you and said, look, your cholesterol hasn't returned to normal, you could really do with leaving it, coming back in another 4 weeks and see what you're looking like then. Do you do that, or do you just go off and use anyway? We need to find out whether, and if you go off and use anyway, what could I have done differently to convince you that, look, it's only 4 weeks, just leave it, come back, do your bloods, and we'll check if things are fine. Could make a big difference to you. You know, how do we do that more effectively? So we need to move these things along to a more clinical basis. Then the other thing I think for the next 5 years are finding those harder to reach groups. We're finding, obviously I've mentioned about women, we've got older men who may be going to private clinics, or they may be just buying gear, but not engaging within the sort of anabolic steroid using community. You know, how do we engage with them properly to make sure that what they're doing and see what we can do to support them? For young people, before they perhaps get involved in the gym environment, we know that some young people do start using, not to the extent that you'd see in the national media, but we need to engage with them earlier. We need to be able to engage with people in prison. There's probably a lot of different subgroups out there. What we've done over the years is, and I'd be more guilty than anyone, is shooting fish in a barrel. You know, you go into a hardcore gym, you find the biggest fella in there, yes, he uses steroids. That's not that difficult. We need to find those other people who are using for other purposes. People who are using in conjunction with other groups, that maybe the chemsex side of things, people who are using much more for sexual purposes. So I think we need to go out broader, but on the research side, also look at that clinical side. I think is very important.
Yeah, very good points, Jim. Thank you a lot for your explanation. The second question I would like to ask, where should policies focus on in the next years with regard to primary and secondary prevention of IPED use?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one. And I suppose I draw on the work that we did with Jeff and that systems mapping, and I found that really illuminating. I think while we're talking about drugs, I think we need to move away from the drugs bit in many respects. If we're going to really help people develop the tools to make informed choices about using anabolic-androgenic steroids, or make a choice not to use. And that comes with developing a whole range of different skills. And a couple of the people who were involved in the systems mapping work brought this up about how to value information. I think developing people's skills and understanding around the internet, around what techniques are being used to sell things, and making people appreciate that the reasons these things are being done, and what influences like social media and how people are being manipulated. And I think some of those generic skills may well be more useful to develop in relation to prevention than perhaps increasing somebody's knowledge around the complexities of the drugs or the pharmacology or issues around that. It's much more around decision making. Why do you want to use? Why are you contemplating the use? What would stop you using? What would encourage you to use? And trying to tease those things out into that decision making. And once we can find out those things, that's how we should gear those messages. You know, if you could also transfer that to your previous question around over, saying you got blood results back and you get what a reading coming back as, 10.3. Well, it's a bit high. If it had been 12, would that have stopped you using? What is are you having a cutoff point? If so, I'm going to have this discussion with you next time you're in. If it does hit 12, getting that so that it doesn't just drift, making people set their goals, their targets. Can they reach it a safer way, an easier way, a way which doesn't involve them having to risk being ripped off or risk their health to the same extent? So teasing those things, but it's all about that communication and engaging with users and potential users and finding out exactly what they want to do it for. If it's someone says, yeah, I just want to get big on the beach for 3 months' time, so well, just get a bit bigger in 3 months' time. You don't need to use steroids for that. If you want a lifetime career in bodybuilding and be the biggest man in the world, it might be a different conversation we'd have to have. But it's to find out why people want to do things and what would influence their decisions. And I think we have to be a lot smarter around that. I think we're only just getting to terms with that.